Hey guys. So, the question of today's video is, does more stats result in a better unit? I think most people would probably by default say yes, but today's video definitely will take a look at this and look at some common problems you probably face when using any of these units in hopefully an ideal place. So even though this video may be targeted at Ninja Hana, it will definitely give you perspective on the rest of these Green Axe Infantry should you likely use one, because as someone who still uses pretty much Raven and Summer Xander in 2020, I'm going to take a hard, very comprehensive look at what makes Ninja Hana probably, maybe, better than the rest of these. Maybe, but that's why you'll have to find out. So enjoy the Alright guys, so the first thing we'll take a look at is obviously the stuff that Hana brings to the table. Now I'm not going to cover this extensively because honestly, the point of this video isn't to look at Ninja Masakari or Wrath or Life and Death or any of this stuff that she comes with. Realistically, it's not that impressive or useful. Unfortunately, the weapon cannot be refined and therefore is not an ideal weapon for Arena because it would lower your score. And for AR, it's a type of weapon that kind of wants you to like quad, and quadding isn't like a really useful playstyle. Like, you don't really want to quad enemy units to Gale Force off of them. You'd rather like one-shot them with Special Acceleration, or possibly just hit them twice with some form of Blade or Special Acceleration as well. So like Altina is fine, for example, as a Gale Force unit if she has someone like Valoria bumping her up. So this weapon, I don't see it being too great other than maybe in PvE to like quad stuff. It's interesting, but it doesn't really have a place right now. So what we're going to definitely cover in this video is mostly Hana, and my take on this is if you want to go crazy in like PvE, then this is a really good, weapon for that. But realistically, let's take a look at Hana and how she stands out. Now, in the beginning of this video, I took a look at Hana as kind of her comparison, briefly of course, to the other Green Axe Infantry. So you'll see here that she's just basically as a free unit to us, standing out better than almost all the rest of these. I'd say maybe like Mustafa and Ross with the high attack they have could definitely do some good things as well, but then you'll quickly realize that like a threat like Dimitri cuts down damage reduction through speed checks, and Ross and Mustafa all of a sudden aren't really as good as Hana. So right away, situations like that push Hana to be a little bit better than them in those cases. Of course, her extra res is a good and a bad thing. The good thing is for AR, it makes her a really solid carry if you want to do that. If you want to actually run her as a carry in AR, and like I'm gonna judge based on Astra season, of course, because Astra is the difficult season. So if you want to use her in Astra season as a carry, this is actually pretty good because a high attack, speed, and res are ideal because most common threats tend to be res based, like magical hits, and green is a good color to be because again, there's not really the most threatening of red enemy units. It mostly comes down to like blue and green threats, or colorless I guess, which makes Hana stand out as her stat spread actually being really good, like a really solid stat spread. Additionally, she has that speed and defense super boon, so Hana is like actually very premium, very good where she stands compared to all these other Green Axe Infantry. However, if you've already invested in Ross or Echidna at +10 or anyone else here, even Libra and Summer Yoder, despite being older, are still very serviceable, and it's not like you have to try to play catch up every single year for the latest Green Axe Infantry. I'm a little behind personally, and as a Hana fan, I'll show you guys a little bit of Hana +10 arena gameplay there. But realistically, as a Hana fan, this is my chance because I've been using Raven and Summer Xander for like the longest time. Like I have like 2017 Axe Infantry, so I might as well upgrade to the latest thing. So I'm very heavily personally leaning towards possibly investing into Hana when she releases in the January update. So with that being said, just again quickly looking over her stats, she's pretty much I'd say stats in the right places. High attack, high speed, good bulk because of all the extra stats she has. Super boon in speed and defense makes her a good unit in arena. 180 scoring is huge. Like, that is crazy solid. I mean, seriously, it's like it's like Flame Emperor, but not having all the problems of being an armor, which is like low mobility and armor weakness, of course, which definitely are a big problem. So good solid stat spread. With that being said, though, I want to definitely take a look at common matchups. So when I think of green units, green carries, I think of water season. Okay, so high scoring means you probably want them in arena core. And what are you mostly going to see in water season as your most common threats? Well, right now that's going to be Dimitri and Chrom. They've shared together on a really good legendary banner. Chrom has been around a while and everyone knows how menacing he is. And of course, finally, you might run into Legendary Azura, and I don't really think you'll run into the other legendaries, but if you do, they're not really a problem. Legendary Azura, so I did say high res is a problem, and the reason for that is because with too much res, and in the case of Hana, you actually will make it very difficult to bait out Azura, unless she receives like attack buffs or some sort of help through her teammates to reach a 5 damage rule so that she attacks. In most cases, I feel like Hana will not be able to properly bait Azura, and therefore run into some difficult scenarios for you. However, because Dimitri scores much more than Azura does, I suspect the most common water legendaries you run into will just be Dimitri and Chrom, especially if you try to push your score using a unit like Hana plus another water legendary itself. So what I'm going to show you here is a couple of simulations of how Hana is potentially very good as a latest and greatest core. Remember that Dimitri's weapon is damage reduction through a check of speed, and that's why I said having high speed is actually really good for her and makes her very competitive. Now, this first simulation I've shown here is what I consider the best case scenario ideal build in arena. Now, arena is never ideal best case scenario. You're not going to have this scenario come up. Like, it's going to be pretty rare. What you're seeing here is basically Hana running a Slaying Axe Blue Flame with Infantry Breath supported. Okay, so that means she has special acceleration on Slaying Axe to make Blue Flame proc every combat versus Dimitri and Chrom. That plus the lull skill and a bond skill and Blue Flame's adjacent condition means that this is very unrealistic when you consider that there are ranged threats, including Chrom and potentially dancers like Plumeria, Peony, and of course Azura, means that adjacent allies can definitely be inconsistent. On top of that, you gotta make it, like, you gotta summoner support, you gotta ally support, you gotta, there's just a lot of conditions where this is not realistic, but it is, however, the best case scenario. So if you want to literally kill every version of the most threatening Dimitri's and Chroms, this does it. So Slaying Axe, Blue Flame, Infantry Breath supported if you have a Na, and you kill all sturdy impact, speed Chroms, sturdy impact Dimitri's, doesn't matter. In case the more you buff up Hana, this just ends up one-shotting every version. You don't even need the double, just boom, they're dead. This is literally that. And that means that if you have that case scenario, if you can set this up, maybe using like a Guidance Flyer, for instance, and an Infantry Breath beside that, like Fjorm running Infantry Breath in the C-skill, then sure, you'll probably be in a good spot to do this. But this is not what I'm going to cover this video. This is just showing you that it can be done, but we need to look at more realistic scenarios. So what I think is a solid thing to consider is using a lull skill and the swabber builds. Now the swabber builds, I'm going to show you right here what I'm talking about. This is what I think arena has kind of come down to, is using swabber as your way to give yourself space, like hiding your other units from danger. So like pushing Hana forward, swabber is, you don't want adjacent allies. You actually want to be away from your allies, so like a solo condition, but it also works as a lull attack defense, so it gives you more bulk and more power. And this is actually pretty useful. So what I'm showing here is basically by using a lull skill and damage reduction like close call is a good alternative as well, I'll show that in a bit, you can actually vastly reduce the damage she takes from threats like Dimitri and Chrom with damage reduction like Close Call working really well against Chrom, but less effective against Dimitri. A lull scale is somewhere in between, giving you constant damage reduction against everything, combined with Deck Swapper, of course. You can probably use like lull speed defense as well, because you're still getting Deck Swapper to reduce the attack. So what I'm trying to say here is the lull speed variant is very important because Swabber doesn't do it, and therefore you're getting consistent damage reduction. It does not beat the impact variants. I just showed you that you would need a blue flame to do that, and adjacent allies, basically setting you up perfectly for that scenario. So instead what you want to do is basically kill the variants that are not using impact, and then possibly setting up like a Gale Force on the player phase, plus something like Close Call. And the reason I'm going to mention Close Call here is because instead of Spurn, for example, is because if you're taking multiple engagements using Deck Swabber and throwing Hana forward to try to carry, what you're trying to do is reduce the cooldown of Gale Force through multiple combat engagements, and then on player phase, Gale Force, Close Call, and basically hit and run in arena. This gives you great mobility, especially in situations like me, where I'm running like a 4 melee core, or I'm running an armor like Tiki or Flame Emperor, or you might be as well, and you really got to create that distance. Believe it or not, Spurn is not that good, and it doesn't matter that much when you actually consider that it doesn't win you the matchups. Like, if you're looking at the results down there at the bottom, you'll see that versus the Impact Dimitri and the Impact Chrom, it's not so close that Spurn is going to close it for you, like that 5 damage. So using Close Call can create distance in a more practical scenario to put her into safety, and mostly just try to carry against variants of these legendaries that are really oppressive, by just using Gale Force on player phase to run. Inconsistency through Ether. You may not have the heal when you need it. There's no special acceleration. It's not being prompted by Wrath, so I don't really feel it's that great to use Ether. And Ruptured Sky doesn't matter, because if someone is using Impact and you don't have your double, it's not proccing versus Dimitri or Chrom, so it doesn't really do much except on player phase. So realistically, Ruptured Sky, not that great. And of course, unless you double, and which then doesn't matter because you don't need it. And Ether, inconsistent procs, whereas Gale Force, you get mobility, you get space, and especially combined with Close Call, you'll be able to create that gap of safety. Now I want to show you, of course, that the lull gives you consistent damage reduction, but the Close Call variant is very competitive as well. What you're pretty much doing here is you're beating Chrom better. Like, he does less damage compared to the lull, of course, the lull variant, but you're getting less damage reduction versus Dimitri, who's pretty competitive in speed, especially if he's running a speed res solo seal, or let's say maybe like Swift Sparrow instead. He's actually very competitive in speed, but Hana does compete with him and can actually beat him, especially if there's some support involved. The last thing I'll mention though is that Kestrel Stance is actually better than the solo variants. It scores better, she takes less damage versus Dimitri because she ends up getting more speed from Kestrel Stance, and therefore more damage reduction through Close Call. Attack Defense solo works better against Chrom, reducing his damage, but can definitely put you at risk versus Dimitri without that speed. If there was an attack speed solo, that would be, I think, the best case scenario, because running Kestrel Stance means that Hana is going to lean towards more of enemy phase playstyle as opposed to player phase playstyle. Personally, I'm going to say that the build that I think is ideal here for Arena to make your life as easy as possible is going to be the Distant Counter Close Call Swabber Speed Refined with Kestrel Stance build at the moment. If attack speed solo happens, then that will be ideal in the seal, but that is what I think you want to push for right now. And you can definitely, if you don't have that, you can definitely try Spurn, Repel, and of course a lull. Any speed variant, attack speed or speed defense are perfectly serviceable as well. So wow, that is a lot of information, but to put it simply, Hana is pretty good. She's pretty self-sufficient, and if you end up buffing her, like through long-range buffs like tactics, or maybe a rally and she moves forward, and of course debuffing enemies through the use of panic or chills, she ends up pretty much securing the kills versus Dimitri and Chrom without actually dying. And believe it or not, considering her speed is as good as it is, as you can see on the left, 57 speed, this is with Fjorm speed bonus, of course, but with that sort of speed stat, she can actually beat the dual Byleth variants as well, which run Wind Sweep. She actually ends up outspeeding them, believe it or not, and therefore can beat that as well. So as a carry, this ends up being amazing. She can take on multiple engagements, and I'm actually considering as well using Renewal Seal just so you can literally carry your matches in water season using strictly Hana. A very impressive unit overall. And the Sims, you can pretty much look at that, but if you want further discussion on it, be sure to hit me up on Twitch, Discord as well for further discussions, and the comments below as well. Like, this is pretty detailed stuff, but I gotta admit, the deck swabber build gives you the most flexibility in arena right now, with all your allies staying behind, possibly using drives, chills, and such to support her, as she pretty much tries to sweep water season as best as possible. Using the mobility of Close Call and Gale Force, I think you'll have a good time. This is likely what I'm gonna go for as well in the January update. Whew, what a doozy, right? Alright, so different variants, of course, using the lulls. I definitely think that would be okay. That's the Blue Flame build as well that I mentioned earlier. If you feel like you want to go for like old style arena, or maybe if you don't want to use her in water season, then using a bond skill like this, lull skill, Blue Flame, again, Close Call and Repel and Spurn are serviceable as well, although I just feel like using, I guess in this build, probably Spurn would be ideal, because that way you can just stick with your team and not move or make things awkward. Finally, I want to mention, of course, her Ether Raid's viability. Now, good partners are definitely literally any water legendary. Probably not Erica, I guess. No, Erica's probably fine too. Even Erica would be fine. Any water legendary is good because they're not green. So they work well, drives to support, infantry breath if you run the Blue Flame build. But what I do want to talk about here is, of course, how Hana is serviceable in AR. So I'm judging this based on Astra, and I think ideally, this is triple mythic with Plumeria. Ideally, if you run with Plumeria, that will make it a lot easier since Plumeria works as your range unit. And you kind of have to run a max invested Naga with a defense IV Hana in AR to make this work. And the reason you got to do that is because if you run the speed super boon, there is like no way to soak chill speed from Hana using any of the Astra Mythics. The only way you do it is pretty much Naga with a Flame Tongue, Speed Refine, Life and Death 4, Attack Speed 2. Yeah, she has that much stats that it's that difficult to soak for her. But if you do this, if you manage to pull this off, she is ridiculously good, has healing through noontime QR to beat impacts because her speed stat is insanely good, and using, of course, Spurn, which I feel is good in AR. You don't really want the mobility of close call to like hit traps, and Repel is okay, I guess, but Spurn works just fine there. Having a good HP stat to dodge most building conditions makes her actually pretty solid as a AR unit as well. So like, I guess my TLDR of this and Hana in general is that more stats is good in the right place, of course. So the fact that she has a res stat, the fact that she has a really good attack and speed stat, good HP overall, makes her overall like really good in most areas of the game right now. So if you haven't basically invested in 2020 or maybe 2019 Axe Infantry, and I'm talking Libra, Echidna, Ross, whatever, if you skipped all those, I do think that adding Hana to your core in some place probably will do you a lot of good. And I will probably be doing exactly what I showed you guys in this video. So if you are curious to see it in action, of course, I'll probably put gameplay of it in the future here in these videos. But if you want to see it in action in a month or two from now, be sure to hit up the Twitch channel as always, and let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Much love. Peace.